your shoulders. So you have a big responsibility. Yeah.
Okay, I'm making the webinar live. I'll wait for a few people to log in. I'll start with the intro. Okay, great. So I'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's session on a topic that will shine light on how we can speed up the transformation to e-buses in India with lessons from across the globe. A session which is aptly titled Electrification for Buses, Speeding Up the Change. The session is brought to you by the team at Commercial Vehicle Forum, or as you're more popularly known, CVF, in partnership with ZF. My name is Rohit Devan, and I'm the event director at CVF. While most of you are already aware, but for some of the new attendees who are joining us, just to give you a quick introduction, Commercial Vehicle Forum is India's premium C-level event focused on commercial vehicle and road transport. And before we begin today's webinar, I'm really pleased to share with you that, after a 2-year hiatus, the 6th physical edition of our event, Commercial Vehicle Forum, is returning to its pre-pandemic glory on 9th of June at the JW Marriott in Pune. Registrations for the event are now open, so head on over to cvforum.in to know more and block your slot. And now moving to the agenda for today's session, I will be delivering a brief welcome note of 5 to 10 minutes and kicking off the proceedings. And as part of this introduction, I will be introducing the speakers and moderator for today's session. Our moderator will then give a quick overview of the topic and initiate the panel discussion that will last for around about an hour. We will also devote a few minutes during the panel discussion to run polls to obtain your feedback. And post the completion of the discussion, we will have few audience questions in the Q&A segment of around 15 minutes at the end. Your active participation is important to make the session a success. And right now we have all of you in listen-only mode, but this is how you can communicate with us. This is how you can interact with us. In your control panel at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box. You can insert your questions. You can put your questions in the Q&A box. This will help us, focus on your questions in a focused manner. We will take those questions in the Q&A segment at the end of today's session. You can also choose to upvote these questions. This will help us in addressing the most burning topics. We also invite you to share your insights in the polls that will be regularly flashing on your screen to share your insights with us as well. Do note that we have this session streaming live on YouTube, so you can watch the session on YouTube as well. And we will also be sharing a recording of this session for you to watch at leisure later. Apart from that, I request you to share your insights in the feedback form that will open on your screen when you exit the session. This will help us in improving the standards we already have in place. And if there's something you're interested in knowing more about the session or any of our participants or anything else, do feel free to reach out to us. So before we begin today's session, I wanted to quickly thank our partner, ZF, for supporting this session. ZF, as all of you are aware, is a global technology company supplying systems for passenger cars, commercial vehicles, and industrial technology, thereby enabling the next generation of mobility. ZF allows vehicles to see, think, and act in the 4 technology domains of vehicle motion control, integrated safety, automated driving, and electric mobility. ZF offers comprehensive product and software solutions for established vehicle manufacturers and newly emerging transport and mobility service providers. ZF electrifies a wide range of vehicle types. With its products, the company contributes to reducing emissions, protecting the climate, and enhancing safe mobility. With some 157,500 employees worldwide, ZF reported sales of over 38 billion euros in fiscal 2021. The company operates in 188 production locations in 31 countries worldwide. And now, talking more specifically about the Commercial Vehicle Solutions division at ZF, ZF's Commercial Vehicle Solutions division, or CVS for short, is helping shape the future of commercial transportation ecosystems. Their mission is to be preferred global technology partner to the commercial vehicle industry. They do this by powerfully combining ZF's commercial vehicle systems expertise, extensive technology portfolio, and global operations. The division serves the full commercial vehicle industry value chain. And as the automotive industry progresses towards an increasingly autonomous, connected, and electrified future, ZF's CVS division innovates, integrates, and supplies components and advanced control systems that help make commercial vehicles and fleets operate more safely and sustainably. CVS unites ZF's former commercial vehicle technology and commercial vehicle control systems division, the latter being formed following ZF's acquisition of WAPCO in May 2020. So now, moving on to the panel, I would like to briefly introduce the expert speaker group. First up, I would like to introduce Mr. Nishant Arya, who is the vice chairman of the $2.2 billion Indian conglomerate JBM Group. Enriched with education from Bradford University, UK, and London School of Economics, he has been instrumental in transforming the group since 2010. With a strong drive to achieve more, Mr. Arya has diversified the business from auto components and systems to various diverse sectors and a name to reckon with within each of these domains. Today, the group's portfolio spans across 60 manufacturing plants and 5 engineering and design centers in 10 countries. With a major industrial presence for more than 3 decades, the group has been conferred with numerous recognitions, awards, and accolades globally. In fact, under Nishant's leadership, JBM introduced India's first true low-flow city bus, City Life, that is already redefining the dynamics of the public transportation with first-of-its-kind innovative features that ensure enhanced comfort, safety, and security for the commuters. More recently, with the unveiling of Eco Life, India's first 100% electric bus, JBM Group has committed that its electric buses will be clocking 1 billion e-kilometers in 3 years, thereby saving around 300 million liters of diesel and approximately 1 billion kg of CO2. Nishant's intense passion and enthusiasm for his work, combined with his visionary leadership and long-term thinking, has been recognized time and again in the auto sector. Under his stewardship, JBM Auto has been recognized among the elite set of the 10 greatest value creators in the Fortune India 500 companies. Our next speaker is Mr. Randir Singh, who is an electrical engineer from NIT and an MBA from IIM Calcutta. He has worked in corporate for 12 years before joining Niti Aayog as lateral entrant at director level in e-mobility. Previously, he worked in management positions with Daimler and MAN Truck and Bus India. He's a senior team member for many auto and EV policy initiatives at Niti Aayog, including setting of EV infrastructure standards, battery swapping, charging standards, PLI, etc. He's a much sought after speaker and a thought leader, and has co-authored several reports, including the recently launched report on need for advanced chemistry cells in India. Next, we have Mr. V. Ramanathan, who is head OE business at ZF Commercial Vehicle Control Systems India Limited. He has over 3 decades of experience across multiple domains, including manufacturing, engineering, project management, marketing, and sales. He started his career with Maruti Suzuki India as a member of the manufacturing team. And post his 12-year stint with them, he joined ZF Commercial Vehicle Control Systems India Limited, which was formerly known as WAPCO India, as part of the manufacturing team, followed by a stint in project management before joining his current role in marketing and sales. In terms of his education, he holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and is an alumnus of MIT Sloan Business Schools and MDI Gurgaon. Our fourth speaker for the session is Mr. Sumit Mittal, who is CFO at Greencell Mobility. Sumit has over 15 years of experience in project and corporate finance and was last associated with Yes Bank as a senior president and regional business head for West and South regions. During this stint, he has managed a book of INR 40,000 crores and underwritten some of the largest projects across ports, airports, roads, shipping, and renewable sector. In the past, he has worked with ICICI Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, and DHL Express. In terms of his education, he's a BE in metallurgy from MNIT Jaipur with a PG DBM from MDI Gurgaon and Warsaw School of Economics. Our final speaker for the session is Dr. Andreas Grossel, who's currently the Vice President and Global Product Segment Leader, E-Mobility Driveline, CVS Division at ZF Group. He has more than 15 years experience in CV business, especially in the bus and coach business within ZF. He has worked in different areas and leadership roles like sales, engineering, testing, validation, project management, and general management functions. In terms of his education, he's a PhD in transmissions from TU Munich and has a master's degree in mechanical engineering and business administration from TU Graz, Austria. Finally, I would like to welcome our moderator for today's session, Mr. Shamsher Dewan. He is the group head and vice president at ICRA and has been with the rating agency for over 14 years now. Based out of the Gurgaon office, Shamsher is part of the corporate ratings group and covers automotive and logistics sectors. He is also part of ICRA's credit rating committee and has extensive experience of evaluating performance of companies across various sectors, including automotive, logistics, pharma, healthcare, travel and tourism, and consumer products. Shamsher has worked on various credit assignments for leading companies rated by ICRA and has been instrumental in developing ICRA's research offerings. He's an MBA in Finance and Capital Markets from Narsi Munji, Mumbai. Over to you, Shamsher, to take it forward.
Thank you very much, Rohit. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CVF's webinar series on the electrification of buses in India. My name is Shamsher, and I'm part of ICRA's corporate rating team. It is my privilege to moderate this discussion with an esteemed panel members on one of the most important and evolving topics in the current industry environment for the auto sector. Electric vehicles now have become the buzzword now, not just globally across all key markets, but in India as well. The question now in everyone's mind is not whether the future is electric, but it is at what pace EVs will replace internal combustion based vehicles. Unlike the global markets where passenger cars are actually leading the penetration of EVs, India is charting a somewhat different trajectory given the unique construct of our automobile industry, wherein two-wheelers and three-wheelers account for majority of the vehicle population. That apart, the government on its part has also announced series of initiatives to boost not just the demand through incentive programs, but also has committed to create an ecosystem to achieve meaningful backward integration into manufacturing EV battery cells, as well as key components that go into EVs. In addition, the government is also working on policies to address the charging infrastructure and standardization of the related norms. And as we speak today, I think a draft policy on public charging infrastructure has recently been announced by the Government of India. Now, aided by a series of these measures and improving cost of ownership, the sales of electric two-wheelers in India grew by almost 5 times in last fiscal, while the sales for electric three-wheelers doubled in terms of volume compared to the previous year. Although at not the same pace, but momentum is still visible in the electric bus segment as well, thanks to Government of India's FAME 2 policy, which is encouraging many SRTUs to now adopt electric buses in their fleet. Now, with this background, let me not waste further time and start the panel discussion by inviting some comments from Mr. Randir Singh, who represents the Niti Aayog for us today. Mr. Singh, if I can come to you first and ask you a very broad level question as to how do you evaluate the progress of FAME 2 policy purely from a point of creating demand incentive in relation to electric bus segment? Now, if you look at the actual target or the plan that was proposed, roughly 7,000 odd buses were to be, bidded out and given incentive as part of the FAME2 policy. Would like to understand from you, how has that progressed? What was the challenge that we saw on account of COVID? And how are things moving from here on? Sir, I think you are on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Devan, and it's a very pertinent question because, talking about the public transport in our country, we have, currently India has between 0.5 to just 1 bus per 1,000 population, whereas the countries like Brazil, China have more than 2 buses per 1,000 population. And if we want to meet this requirement, definitely by 2031, around 300,000 new buses has to be inducted into the system. So that means the scope is huge. And if we see what is happening right now, we are not having more and more buses induction, whether it is CNG or whether it is ICE, leave apart the e-buses. So that is why the government of India has now sort of focused that in 4 million plus population cities, the 9 cities which we have, the electric buses will be flooded in these 9 cities mainly. These are going to be the focus markets, focus cities for flooding the electric vehicles. Now coming to the FAME incentives. So as you already know, during the FAME 1, total outlay was around 8.95 billion. And the sanctioned subsidy was for the 390 e-buses. Out of these 390 e-buses in 11 cities, 220 are still operating in 8 cities. And in the second phase, we had around 5,955 buses were sanctioned. These were for the intercity operations. Around 400 were for the intercity and around 100 for the DMRC's last mile connectivity, Delhi Metro Rails. However, in FAME 2, we changed the model to the GCC. But after feedback from the OEMs, SRTUs, and other stakeholders, last year we also revised this model and we have now shifted to the aggregation model. And CESL is now responsible for the aggregation of the buses. In fact, 5 cities have already come together. This is for the harmonization of the standards, what type of buses are required. We don't have too much supply of buses in our country. Not many manufacturers are there. One of JBM is already, Nishant is here in the panel itself, and he can vouch for that. But not many, the manufacturers are there which can actually provide you the type of bus you require. Right now, around 80% of the buses, e-buses, are the 9-meter buses. So every city has their different requirement, and that is what now the modified FAME 2 is trying to address. In fact, the bids are already being submitted. We have. I'm not at the. Currently, I cannot reveal what has happened, what has not happened, but soon you will see the results of those also. And we received, in fact, a very good bids for those. And this is also oversubscribed from both the sides. The number of e-buses required under FAME 2 and the buses which cities want. In fact, not all 9 cities, only 5 of cities want more than the buses which is required. So that means there's a huge scope from the demand side, and also from the the companies which want to provide. The number we are seeing increasing, but still we think that from the industry perspective, more of the players needs to come to provide the buses, because the number is huge. We cannot wait for 1, 2, or 3 years for those numbers to be on road.
Sure. Thank you for your opening comments. Mr. Arya, if I can come to you now, sir. You are not just manufacturing buses in India now, both electric and CNG and otherwise, but you're also operating them actually in many cities, and you've been successfully participating in many tenders. Would you like to share with us, what has been your overall experience with respect to the, how the FAME 2 policy has actually created that environment to adopt electric buses by SRTUs? And as Mr. Singh mentioned that, now we are moving away from GCC to aggregation model. So how do you see the opportunity really, kind of evolving now?
No, first of all, I think what we are doing as a country is the best, I think, which any country has done, in my opinion, what I have seen in terms of creating a conducive environment where you're focusing on demand and supply and really creating an enabling environment with the power infrastructure, the subsidies which different states are coming up with. I think that's very encouraging for the sector, because as a country, we all understand how important health and environment is. And based on that, we are focusing on zero emission technologies, and how India has set up the International Solar Alliance in the area of renewable energy, becoming the global headquarters for solar. I think something similar can be done in electric vehicle, and that's where we are headed. When we look at this particular domain, I see that the common man is what is being addressed today. As Randir spoke about FAME 2 policy or FAME 1. So if you see in FAME 2, out of the allocation of funds for FAME 2 for vehicles, more than 40% is dedicated to electric buses, because that is catering to the common man, which is majority of our population across the country. Generally, as even you mentioned, Shamsher, that the number of vehicles are largest in two-wheeler or three-wheeler categories, because of the sheer number. We talk about 80-85% coming from that segment. But we need to understand what is the asset utilization and what is the impact we have on a common man. Today, millions and millions of people are using these buses across the country, where they're transitioning from a need to a choice they are making, because of the affordability, the safety, and the comfort which they get in these kind of vehicles here. And the other point is that how can we create a solution? In FAME 1, we were selling buses, and the different STUs, SRTUs, or municipal corporations or the designated bodies were using these vehicles. But in this case, the clear understanding was that a big roadblock was the understanding of the technology and the whole ecosystem perspective. And that is where we transitioned from just an electric bus manufacturer in FAME 2 in 2019 to a e-mobility ecosystem partner and a solution provider. And that has been a big change, because we were there in FAME 1 and now we're there in FAME 2, participating and catering to multiple cities. So if you see majority of the top state capitals, we are present in those across the country, and in different models for that matter. And the total cost of ownership has become the prime focus for companies like us, where nobody is interested in cheap products, but competitiveness is being driven through technology driving value. And I think that is what is most important today and will be sustainable in the longer term. When you look at this, there are so many new technologies which are coming across today. And when we are doing such kind of solutions, definitely discoms have to align with the infrastructure of power coming to the depots. The structure of the contracts have to be such which are made bankable, and for which the right institutions are participating. They get comfort while they are participating in these contracts with the concessioners or the bidders like us, who are giving the whole EV ecosystem. On the other hand, what is the kind of technology roadmap to optimize the technology? We see a few neighboring countries giving cheap products, which I see some companies adopting today. But how sustainable are they in the longer term? Definitely, it's important to win contracts. And I think Randir would agree with me, since he understands that in the past, in the renewable energy era, also this happened initially for the first few years. But then the technology got stabilized and players were there. But we have to see that here in this case, it's not a static environment in which the vehicle is there. It's a dynamic environment. It involves people safety. And that's where you have seen multiple fires and other incidents happening in the last few weeks and months. And even in certain bus companies, that was a reality which was there seen. So I think it is very important that how you are working with the best in class products with the utmost level of safety and global technology. And I think would be happy to understand Dr. Grossel's perspective in terms of safety, technology, credit driving value in the longer term. But developing those technologies locally has been our focus. So make in India and make for the world. Clearly, so setting up manufacturing facilities who are developing, creating technology, working with best-in-class partners, and then giving this experience to the customers at the most competitive price is what one is looking at. How to maximize the asset utilization, creating a strong vendor base. We have localized with more than 30 vendors now in India, creating a strong base and seeing that how can these models be creating large scale and volume for them, so that they invest in technology, they create scale, and the competitiveness can be driven on a consistent basis. The other aspect is that we are also benefiting with this on the energy security front, which is a separate topic altogether. But in terms of the maintenance cost for such vehicles with a number of moving parts reduced from about 2000 to 20 odd moving parts in such kind of vehicles, and clearly seeing that how skill gap is being addressed, which is a challenge today. And we need skilled people, and people keep moving from one organization to the other. And therefore, one has to clearly understand that how you are building that skill matrix, and the number of people, the pool is increasing for the industry at large, which is going to be very critical. And companies are investing in technologies because it's all a technology driven product. Even though a bus may look like a bus from outside, a large role of power electronics, of new chemistries in batteries, the kind of magnet and hub reduction in motors, the kind of ASM technologies, the induction motor or permanent magnet motor. So all different kinds of technologies, large focus on lightweighting. So I think it is an amalgamation of all such unique technologies where people would like to see that how the mileage is maximum, we are reducing the weight, having the least amount of parasitic losses, having very high level of reliability since you're carrying such a high voltage. Because you have to understand, when you look at a two-wheeler, three-wheeler, vis-a-vis a four-wheeler and a bus, you go to 700 volts of current in this case. So you operate at a very different level. So safety is of a different paradigm altogether. And at that time, if the people are not trained properly, many such incidents can happen. So one has to be very careful, and we have to clearly see that how do we institutionalize the whole process. But at the same time, when we have about 1.8 million buses in India, I see the future to be great. And when we have 70,000 to 90,000 buses which enter the market, I'm saying on a stable state basis prior to COVID. So I see that going down the next few years, where FAME has acted as a true catalyst today, giving the clear inertia, putting in stable contracts, giving the industry a clear direction. I think in the next couple of years, by FY25 or so, or by year 2025, we would be hitting parity in this, or maybe even faster in some longer route cases. Because today, majority of the subsidy is going for city buses, which a common man is using. So therefore, technologies which are giving that kind of range, that kind of performance, is what is most important for us. And I personally feel that in next 3 to 4 years, let's say 2026 or 26, 27, we should be having approximately 50%, 40 to 50% of the new buses being produced in India could be clearly electric and electric-related technologies. So I think that's the opportunity we are all looking at, which is growing at a very rapid pace. And in this first phase, I think few different technologies will coexist. And then competitiveness will drive the second phase for the next 5 years from there, how things will evolve and move forward. But I think bus would be one of the fastest people movers to get transition to electric mobility, and having the highest impact. So when you say in two-wheelers or other cases, 80% volume, so I would say buses would have 80 to 90% of the public which would be using this mode of transport, and having that impact socially and economically for the people and the country at large.
I think you've kind of covered all aspects of the challenges that we see in adopting electric vehicles. But I'll pick up one of those points from your comments, and maybe move to Mr. Ramanathan to share his views from ZF's perspective. So one question that comes to our mind is about achieving, cost parity in the post subsidy era, right? Now, if you split the overall cost of an electric bus, today we know that 40 to 50% of the cost is purely coming from that of the batteries, where in India we don't manufacture battery cells. However, there is a PLI policy which the government has recently floated, and many companies have actually successfully participated in, they've made themselves eligible to, set up manufacturing here in India. But this is still at least 3 years away in terms of manufacturing those cells in India. But if we leave apart the battery cell part, the rest of the components that go into electric vehicles, particularly into buses, where does India stand in terms of, achieving localization, and what is the way forward? If you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Shamsher. As you rightly pointed out, 50% of the cost of the vehicle goes to battery, and there are many technologies, and many people are working on the various battery technologies to bring down the cost of the batteries, as well as extract more kilometers per kilowatt hour of the battery. So there are a lot of technology advancements are going on in this field. Apart from batteries, we as component suppliers and OEMs are targeting that apart from batteries, the cost of the electric buses should be same as a conventional IC engine bus. So that is the parity, which ultimate objective we are working with jointly with the OEMs. In that respect, ZF works hand in hand with the different OEMs on localization plans. Like from ZF, we have already localized some of our braking systems and the electric compressors. We are also now kicked off the localization of the drivetrain and inverters and other components. So in this respect, the government is also provided a fantastic framework in terms of the FAME 2 phased manufacturing program timelines, as well as the PLI scheme, where many of, like including ZF, many of the leading auto component players have also applied and got selected, and they are also working on the different localization. All put together, I am seeing by second or later half of this decade of after 26 or something, by 26 or something, 2026, many of the OEMs may achieve parity of the electric buses, except the batteries. The other cost of the vehicle will be equal to the conventional buses. That's the scenario I'm seeing.
Sorry, Sumit, if I can come to you now. At Greencell, you are also, leading the transition to electric bus segment in the private sector, and you've successfully bid for many of the SRTU projects, and you're looking at other projects as well, which is beyond the SRTU segment. Can you share your experience of how the entire ecosystem is actually panning out? As Mr. Arya mentioned, I think it is not just important for the government to come in and support through demand incentive. That is just one part of the overall puzzle. But you need the entire ecosystem in place. I mean, you need the discoms to have equal skin in the game. You need to create contracts wherein you can get adequate financing available at competitive rates. So at Greencell, how has been your experience in the overall operation so far for you?
Hi, Shamsher. Good afternoon, everybody. At Greencell, we are at a very fantastic stage of our journey in the e-mobility space, right? We are in the process of setting up almost 1,750 buses, 900 in the B2G segment, which is the government segment, and the remaining 850 odd in the private intercity segment, right? So clearly there is a lot of support which is coming in from the government side in terms of various regulations and various clarifications which are coming in terms of waivers, in terms of registration, various things are coming in from the central side. But there are a lot of areas which can further be facilitated from a state perspective. So for example, if there is a policy of zero registration charges on electric vehicles, which has been rolled out by center, then implementation at an RTO level, right, where the actual bus is getting registered, is something which is still work in progress. In some of the progressive cities, in some of the progressive states, that has already been implemented. But when we are looking at a pan-India presence, it is still work in progress in a lot of cities. Similarly, from a banking and financing institute, which is close to my heart, I think we started with a situation where the lender ecosystem was extremely narrow, right? Now we see a lot of lenders coming up, and they have got their board policies approved for electric vehicle financing, and they have started their first few. They have done their first few transactions. I think that's a great achievement to have in terms of the creating that lender ecosystem. And I feel that now I don't think so. If there is a good project with the viability, finding a right lender will be a challenge. So we have moved to that stage where from absolutely no lender, we have reached to a stage where, if the project is good, we can definitely find a lender. We've been very successful in raising almost 2,500 crores of debt for various projects that we have kind of, onboarded, and various government as well as private sector institutions, including the development financial institutions, have come forward and supported us in our progress. So there has been a lot of accelerated learning curve which is happening at the STU level also, because they are also doing some of these concession agreements for the first time. And some of the states like UP have been extremely proactive and supportive in terms of implementation, fast implementation of the buses. Currently, we have over 500 buses which are operational in various cities. So that gives us a lot of confidence in terms of their performance levels, in terms of their energy efficiency. And now that they've been running for the last 4 or 5 months, it gives us a lot of established track record on the product. So I think that's a very critical point to establish when we are proving the point, proof of concept when the product is established, right? And while, as rightly pointed by Randir in his comments, that while we have a great ecosystem of OEMs, but there is a lot to be desired in terms of the number of options, the price points at which the viability is there. So there is a lot of progress which is happening, and I think we are adopting a concentrated approach on the 9 cities by the government. I think that is really working very well, because that will give the right incentives to the OEMs to kind of really build their capacities and bring down the cost. So we are looking forward for a very positive development in the sector. And we are working very closely with various OEMs and various suppliers and ecosystem partners across the value chain to kind of build it out. Green energy is something that we are very passionate about, because we don't believe in displacement of pollution. We want elimination of pollution. As a Government of India investee company by NIF and DFID, which is Government of UK, our primary objective is to reduce the carbon footprints, and we are totally committed to do that. And I think our concession agreements also require a little bit of tweaking to allow green energy to kind of come in. But I think we see a very positive approach towards this issue by most of the STUs as well as the center. So we are very hopeful that we will be able to kind of convert all of this energy requirement into green energy through group captive requirements.
It's very encouraging to hear from you, Sumit, that the banks have now adopted policies to fund electric vehicles. So they've clearly now started to understand the risk profile of these projects, and they've started looking at these projects. I think that will play an important role in scaling up or ramping up EV buses, especially in the SRTU segment, where funding has always been a constraint. Mr. Singh, if I can come to you now, sir. From an industry perspective, everyone looks at the planning side from a slightly longer term perspective. While the government has clearly played a very important role, and through timely interventions, they've come out with schemes to create demand and to create an ecosystem. But what happens post the expiry of FAME2 policy, as we've heard from some of our panel members here, that it will take some time for electric vehicles, particularly buses, to achieve cost parity, and especially in the current environment where we see that the battery costs are going up thanks to all the global scenario. So in that view, how is the government actually looking at kind of extending the support that may be required to further accelerate the demand for EVs? Sir, you're on mute, I think.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think this is the question which almost everyone wants to ask and keeps on asking, what happens once the subsidy goes out or the fiscal incentives goes out. So currently, if you see, there are two mechanisms of the fiscal subsidy. One is at the federal level and second is at the state level. almost 18 states have declared their EV policy. So there are demand side incentives, and also in some of the states, manufacturing side incentives are also there. But of course, the money with the government for these incentives is limited. Initially, for the to nudge the early adopters, to help them and to support and build the ecosystem as well as the confidence in the technologies. This nudge is very much required, and it's not only in our country, but in fact across the world this has been done, including the China, US, and other countries, European countries also. But in the long term, of course, statutory and regulatory measures has to take over so that this whatever momentum has been built is not being lost. That is why if we see right now, in fact, some of the panelists also spoke about it. What is the maximum cost in the vehicle right now? It is of the battery. Almost 50 to 55% it comes to the battery. So advanced chemistry cell program actually hits at this part, wherein right now when we say $137 per kilowatt hour, or even the cost below that for the cells, those costs are not for India. Those costs are outside India. When it comes to India, that cost ranges to $180 to $190 per kilowatt hour. Now, to reduce that cost, what is required? Localization of the supply chain is required. Giga scale production is required. And also it is required that we provide a conducive environment in terms of the regulatory measures, trunk infrastructure, so that these companies come to India and they invest, plus financial incentives. So that is what advanced chemistry cell program does. So 50 gigawatt hour that we will see from the 2 years from now onwards. First cell will come out for sure. Why? Because of the condition within the program. And it's a very, very strict condition. 25% localization within the 2 years of the letter of award, 60% localization within the 5 years of the letter of award. This will ensure that the cell cost, which is available across the world with logistics cost within our country is available. You receive the cell, whatever is prevalent across the world, and this cell will be produced here in our country. So that means whatever requirement is getting generated in our country, those type of cells will be available. So there will be a big impact on this cost first thing. That means whatever incentive structure you need right now with the imported cell, that in itself has to come down, right? This is one. Second thing is all these, not only the buses, in fact, when we shift to the electric EVs, electric vehicles in every segment, there is a large requirement of the semiconductor chips. Currently, even the IC vehicles required at different, to control different telematics, even the engine, EMUs and all, you require the semiconductor chips. Semiconductor PLI is also being announced with $10 billion funding. Apart this, there is an auto PLI, which is for the advanced auto components. And this is around 25,000 plus crore rupees. All these things are keeping in mind that in future, we not only have to rely on the subsidies which are being provided at the demand side, but also at the manufacturing side. If the cost comes down, then definitely the output of this will also come down. Wherein when you don't have these incentives available, then also the product is available at the cheaper price and is more feasible, right? So we have the manufacturing setup from the supply side, that is the battery, maximum cost. Then the advanced automotive components, which is for the production of the EVs in every segment, and then the semiconductor PLI. In addition to this, we also have the solar PLI, which is to provide the power for the charging of these EVs, right? So 4,500 crore was there at the beginning, and now 19,000 crore has also been announced in the budget. So this is how this entire ecosystem has been built and is being incentivized once the demand side incentives are over. I think this answers the question.
I take your point. I think what you're saying is that the demand incentives came first. They will be followed by the government's incentives for backward integration and making us more competitive in manufacturing components. And I think that will take it forward and make it much more sustainable going forward. Dr. Grossel, if I can come to you now, if you look at the overall electric bus segment globally, China is one country where it has taken a significant lead. And if you read through various success stories there. I think one of the factors that really worked well for them was, developing a complete ecosystem at the first instance itself, and that gave them an opportunity to, ramp up electric vehicle bus fleet in certain cities right from the word go. In your experience, what are the key learnings that you've had looking at the global markets, and how well can we adopt them, given the context that we have in India, where, we are very different from rest of the world when it comes to cost cautiousness and, adoption of technologies which have to be far more suitable for the current environment in India.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon also from my side. I think there were some issues in your question. So, what are the advanced market? What are the leaders in the world, and what were the success factors? So, if we look now from a global point of view, you already mentioned China. So, also from my point of view, China is really the edge when it's coming down to battery electric or electrified vehicles. They have now a market share with more than 50% electrified buses. And if you look on the inner city transport, they are more than 90%. And I think one issue was a clear political willingness and strategy to transform to e-mobility. China was in a situation that they were not, let's say, in a competitive situation when it's coming down to combustion engines. So other countries, other continents were far ahead of them. So they directly jumped over the combustion engine and put a lot of effort into electrification. And I think it was also mentioned, battery is a key factor for electrification. And we know Asia and China have a lot of know-how when it's coming down to battery chemistry, cell technology, and this kind of things. Secondly, I would see Europe. In Europe, I think it was a little bit different. There, the pressure of society was increasing quite a lot in the last years. Because just to give you an example, so Fridays for Future, now it's a global movement, global community demonstrating for Fridays for Future. The starting point was in Europe, it was in Sweden. So society was pressing a lot, but also the political willingness is here. So there are clear targets regarding CO2 targets for 2030. So today we are speaking about minus 30% CO2 regulation, CO2 emissions the next 10 years. This is already fixed, and now we have a discussion of minus 45%. And if you look on North America, I think the story is a little bit different because the transit bus market is very small compared to, I would say, India, China, or Europe. So we are just talking about a few thousand buses. But even there, a lot of subsidies are now released under the Biden administration. And I think the second issue you were mentioning, what was the success drivers? We already discussed a lot about subsidies. So subsidy was one driver to get more movement. So just to give you an example, in Europe, so we had of course you have a delta or a difference between a cost of a combustion driven bus and an electric driven bus. And the subsidy was in that way that 80% of this difference you got as a subsidy. So from a fleet point of view, it was not, the hurdle was not so high to purchase an electric driven bus. And secondly, I think the bus industry or the bus operation is a very dedicated business. So you have a lot of different stakeholders and you have to try to bring them on one table, align the targets, align the strategies, and then move on one common road, on one common vision. So if I look on the stakeholders, you have the legislation, you have the governments, you have the associations, which is typical for bus business. You even have global associations like UITP, which is doing their lobby work. You have the OEMs, the vehicle manufacturers. You have the suppliers, the tier 1 suppliers, like we are as ZF. You have the fleets, which are doing the operation of the bus. And in addition to that, you have local authorities like different cities doing their own or having their own targets. So, and especially I saw it in Europe, they were trying to pull all the stakeholders together to bring them into the boat, align the vision, align the strategy, and then everybody is speaking the same language. And as a third issue, I think it is a little bit different because everybody now is looking on localization and trying to get, let's say, the know-how in their area, in their country, and protect their markets. Canada, for example, was doing a little bit different. They were opening the markets for foreign technologies. So battery cells already was mentioned, electric parts, electronic parts were mentioned, like inverters, but even e-motors, because it was not available in the domestic market. So they really, at the first kickoff, they opened the market, and then to try to speed up, to bring the technology into the country, and then do it step by step. So this is what we saw from a global point of view.
Sure. Rohit, at this stage, maybe we can invite a poll and see comments from our listeners on this call. Yes. So the most important parameter, what do you think, is going to be to leap forward into electric buses? You can choose from multiple options here. Do you think it is going to be purely the government incentive, or secondly, standardization of the charging infrastructure? And third, is it about reducing the bus acquisition cost?
Shamsher, you can continue the discussion. We can, people can keep answering.
Sure, that's fine. Mr. Arya, if I can come to you now, sir. I mean, if we were to draw, a broad map for how the electric bus segment actually looks like, in India, clearly, I think there are no reasons to believe that electrification is the way forward. But at the same time, CNG and other technologies also provide compelling solutions. So how do you see the industry, kind of chalking its way out over the next 5 to 10 years? Mr. Arya, are you there with us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was some technical glitch in the middle. Yeah.
So,
no, so basically, see that as Dr. Grossel also shared that when we are moving forward and when we are accelerating the adoption of electric buses in particular, the whole ecosystem has to operate, and we clearly have to see that each and every stakeholder has to bring in that efficiency in the system. The supply chain efficiency would be a very critical part to this, which would bring in the right technology roadmap, also ensuring that it is just not a cut, copy, paste in India vis-a-vis other countries. It's always a customized solution, which we are looking forward in our country being a unique market, and at a different level of volume and domestic dividend, but at the same time, the competitiveness required is very high. So I think a perfect combination of really looking at solutions which are designed for functionality, designed to cost, and designed to a TCO solution, a total cost of ownership, is what is most essential here. And over and above that, if we look at manufacturing and delivery, so like we have already delivered and executed projects of more than 700 buses in states like Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Delhi, Andaman, and among many others. So the idea is that how this becomes the premium becomes a new standard and a way of life in these cities. So we have to handhold the STUs, the DISCOMs, and also work with them what actually is required, because for many of them, they're doing for the first time, and they actually end up considering it because of the lack of understanding and the background to it as a burden upon themselves. So if it is institutionalized as an initiative and as a way of life for all such stakeholders, I think things would be very different. Similarly, working with different financial institutions, I think a lot has changed, because we have been in the market for 3 years now across these different cities. So we have seen a huge transition, and now we are seeing that multiple new players are coming up for the new electric mobility, who are firming up their feet on the ground, which is very good for the market, because eventually the number of players increasing and other things would enhance the market size, which would actually bring an economy of scale for the whole market at large. So that brings in a win-win situation for everybody. And I think another point which is here, why a GCC contract would do very well in this case, is that 100% end-to-end ownership, where the capex cost does go up slightly to a certain extent, but the OPEX cost goes down. So on a holistic basis, it's a competitive model which comes in, and multiple cities in India have done a fantastic job, even in the CNG and diesel space. So replicating it on a pan-India basis with a standard system, and what CSL has done, and we are all looking forward to what is being demonstrated by CSL, how that can be implemented and becomes the way forward for the industry to move, and how different stakeholders can come. And I think there were certain concerns around understanding how GCC and aggregation is different. So in case of aggregation, multiple cities participate and have the same setup which you use, whereas in one GCC contract, it's a specific city which is going for it, instead of the whole industry adopting the same standards. So that is something which would drive this. And another part which is very critical here is the software, and how we are having the remote diagnostic solutions and other solutions which can be used. And as a country, we have always been ahead in terms of IT and the computer science area. So that is something which would be a differentiating factor for us vis-a-vis others. So that is a key focus area which is required to be brought in the forefront for the industry to move forward, and for consumers to clearly see that how they are contributing to the vision of our Honorable Prime Minister of Net Zero 2070. So that is what we would be keenly looking at this. Sorry, just to share with you, Shamsher, actually I have a hard stop in about next 10 to 12 minutes. So sorry for that, but I'd have to log up there. Yeah, thank you.
I think I had one follow-up question for you, but which you've already answered, that what is the difference between GCC and the aggregation model. I think the sense that we're getting is aggregation is nothing but volume play at GCC level, essentially. So it will help us in ramping up electric buses at a much faster pace with standard norms being applied. I think that's the key, right? Okay. Thank you for that. Sumit, if I can come to you now, you talked about the broader vision of having green mobility and initiative. Now, if you look at the various segments of the electric, or not the electric, but the overall bus segment in India, SRTUs are one part of it, and outside that, there's a large private sector market which comprises of intercity operations. Then there is a big school and college bus segment as well, and then there's the tour operator segment as well. Now, clearly, I think the initial focus for the government was on the SRTU segment, and that is where we are seeing some momentum building up. How do you see electrification panning out in some of the other segments, and what are the challenges in those segments to adopt EV buses?
Samshir, my view on this is I think the GCC model at the government STU level were the easiest or low-hanging fruit, because deploying subsidy in this sector is kind of easy for the government. And what it will create with these 8-9 centers of excellence, which very similarly China also did the same thing by creating this concentration areas where the infrastructure, the skills, the spare parts, the technology was available, will bring down the overall cost of the vehicles, right? Today, when you're talking about a school bus where there are more than 4 to 5 lakh school buses which are operational in the country, right? The total running of those buses are around 50 to 60 kilometers average, right? So the cost have to be extremely competitive for these buses to have a TCO which is competitive than that of electric buses, and that too when we're talking about without subsidy, right? Similarly, for intercity, I feel that intercity is already profitable without the subsidy. We are in the process of implementing more than 750 buses across various cities where the average running is more than 500 kilometers a day, right? They are already super competitive. Their TCO is better than the ICE counterparts, right? With the diesel prices running where they are, clearly there is absolutely no business case for ICE buses, right? So from a visibility perspective, I think the early adopters will be obviously the government GCC contracts driven by the subsidy, followed by the intercity play, where there are a lot of operators, but unfortunately there are not many institutional operators which are there, and hence a restriction in terms of their ability to do such large capex, followed by school and B2B. Now, the other thing which we are observing very closely is that a lot of corporates like Microsoft and like, Google and all the big tech companies and like the best corporates in the world, they have a lot of focus towards reducing their overall carbon footprints. So they are kind of, moving their employee transportation completely into electric, right? That's another place where we feel a lot of opportunity to kind of come in. And that's where we see a lot of adoption to kind of, trigger. And as we discussed earlier, if the government is supportive with conducive policies and regulations, I think, it would become a very acceptable mode of transportation going forward.
Rohit, would you like to share, the poll results with us for the first one? Okay. So I think, as expected, most of our participants expect that, reducing the initial cost of bus acquisition is one of the most important aspects, followed by having a very standard charging infrastructure and government incentives, which has to be the initial kicker or the demand enabler in that sense. So thank you very much, all of you, for your comments there. Mr. Ramanathan, if I can now, come to you. At ZF, you must be looking at various technologies which are currently, either at pilot level across the globe or even at, coming to the commercial stage. How do you see, things shaping up for India, beyond the 100% EV system, whether it is about fuel cell technology or hydrogen? How do you see those solutions will actually play a role in the Indian market over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yes, Shamsher. For ZF, we have drawn out the long-term technology roadmap for India. Starting with motor technology, we have all the technologies like permanent magnet or ASM technologies or switch reluctance motors. So all these technologies are there, which is the appropriate for. So we are working along with the OEMs to localize these technologies and make these technologies available to the Indian OEMs at an affordable cost. So starting with that, we are looking at initially the permanent magnet motors, and then we are also working on the other technologies with the OEMs. On the inverters, we also have a range of technologies, starting with the current inverters and going up to silicon carbide inverters. So there also we are now working with the OEMs to localize these technologies, and we also have energy management controllers for the buses, which can control all the systems in the bus and optimize the energy consumption and also increase the range utilization of the buses. And on the other technologies, we are also working the EV at sometime it also goes in line with the connectivity. So many of the EV buses also carry the telematics unit, which can monitor all the performance of the electric buses and optimize and improve its efficiencies. So we are also working with many of the OEMs on localizing these technologies and making these technologies available to Indian OEMs. The third one is at some point of time when we are looking at transportation as a service, which is very beautifully framed by the government in this CSL or aggregation model. The buses will run more kilometers per day, and the uptime management of these buses are very important. So there are many technologies to reduce the accidents and improve the utilization of the buses. So we are also proposing these technologies to the customers. And we also have a different type of lightweighting technologies which can reduce, like for example, our drivetrains are already almost 10 to 15% lighter than the other players in the market, and we also have lightweight axles, energy efficient motors, and which are all best suited for Indian conditions. And we are also so these are all the technologies we are working in India.
Sure. I would like to ask you one question which has come in the Q&A chat box, which is somewhat related. The question is that, to avail FAME 2 subsidy benefits, localization of the motor is actually mandatory. So what is the total localization percentage which is being, required as part of this, and, where are we on that actually?
So the localization percentage required is 25 to 50%. Is the norm specified by the government. We are already have plans to reach 25% by beginning of next year.
Okay, that's
and take it to 100, take it to 50% in the course of next year.
Sure. Dr. Grossel, if I can come to you now, clearly as we see that we rely on the developed automobile markets quite significantly for technology adoption. So looking at from a wider lens, how do you see adoption of these technologies actually coming to India, and what kind of cost effectiveness or technology interventions will be required to make them suitable for the Indian environment? Some specific examples, if you can share with us, that would be great.
Yeah, I think if you are touching the technology transformation and what are the challenges, what we see, and especially the challenges what the manufacturers today see, especially the classical OEMs, they have really now a burden because they have all the, let's say, internal combustion engine still in production, still in development. They have now to do the transformation regarding e-mobility solutions, which in the end ends up in double R&D investments, production investment, and so on. And besides of the electrification, what we are talking now, they still have to do other issues like autonomous driving, autonomous operations, digitalization, and so on. So coming from a vehicle point of view, what we saw in foreign market as a starting position, the most easiest way is to remove the combustion engine and the transmission and replace it with a central motor solution, because then, let's say, more or less the complete vehicle could stay very similar to a combustion engine. You need space for the battery, but the chassis and so on can stay very similar. So this was one approach also to save costs. And this is a challenge the vehicle manufacturing have, and bringing down the costs. I think battery already was mentioned as the key issue, and we saw already in the last years a big drop in the production cost of batteries. It's what volume based, but it was also technology based, because new technologies are popping up, and I think it was also mentioned new players are popping up. So there are new players in the market now which do not have the burden of a combustion engine vehicle in their back. So they really can start from a scratch. They have an advantage there. And these new players are also, I would say, mixing up the markets and really bringing speed and competition. And this in the end helps also to reduce costs, because competition always was also a driver for cost reduction. So I see technology driven, competitive driven, and volume driven in the future as a main contribution to bring down the costs.
That's really helpful. Mr. Arya, one last question for you before I think you have to leave. Off late we've seen that the EV vehicles are too much into the newspapers for all the wrong reasons, thanks to the electric two-wheelers catching fire at various locations in India. Without getting into the reasons why all of that is happening, as an OEM and as someone who represents the industry body, etc., how do you think the associations are actually looking at addressing these areas? I mean, clearly these are very important areas from a consumer or passenger safety standpoint. So what needs to be done there to address the consumer's anxiety levels there?
No, I think very rigorous testing and validation, which at times companies were definitely doing it, but not doing it to really were doing it mainly to meet out the CMVR requirements in many cases. But I think it goes far beyond that, the responsibility which each one of us has to create a product which is completely reliable, safe for any customer. Another thing is that proper training has to be provided to the user, how they should be using this product and how will it be different from the other vehicles. Thirdly, in certain cases, when the vehicle is being used, so what kind of service and modus operandi should be there for such kind of vehicles, I think has to be understood, and awareness has to be enhanced multifold in the public at large for such kind of things. So the such kind of awareness sessions and engagements and interventions should be planned by industry, by academia, and by government and industry associations together, so that people can be educated, and on the other hand, the industry can take such steps. What also is critically important is that certain key elements which are there today, which we are looking at reducing the cost. So we need to see that how are we factoring in the cost reduction measures when we are cutting the fat, not the muscle, while we are doing this. And definitely ensuring that electric mobility is the way forward, and people don't take it in a different sense and get demotivated at this point, where the whole industry is really working together as one unit, giving different solutions today. So I think that is the need of the hour, and that awareness sessions and those kind of engagements and constant interventions is very important. What we saw in a way, you can say, especially in Delhi NCR region for CNG couple of decades ago, and now further things are happening and people are looking at it as way of life moving forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sumit, if I can come to you now, there's a question for you from the Q&A chat box. I'll just rephrase it a bit for you. The question is that you mentioned that now it's becoming easier for companies like yourself to raise, debt funding from the banking channel. But as a business, from a viability standpoint, what kind of returns do you actually see companies like yourself actually generating over the medium term from being an operator, as an operator?
So Shamshir, the way we are seeing it is like, the returns are kind of mellowing down, because like any other technology, this technology is also getting saturated and hyper competitive, if I can use the word. And we are moving towards a phase where the returns are now coming down in the range of 15-16% IRR, and but that is still a substantial cushion for the financial lenders to kind of being able to provide financing. But there are other things which are kind of important, right, which I would like to take 1 minute to point out.
Sure.
See, when you talk about the private sector has got all these electric buses are very capital intensive, and a lot of GST outlay happens, given the fact that there is a large GST input credit which kind of comes in, and if there is no way of claiming the input credit, then it becomes a cost, right, which kind of adversely impacts. So the overall IRR, when we are calculating, we have to look it from 3 or 4 sides. One is obviously the viability in terms of profitability and other things. Second thing is on the overall tax instance, which is kind of getting there. Now, I'll just give you a very simple example. Currently, there is a new GST regulation which has come out under 9(5), right, which says that an e-com operator has to discharge the tax liability like an operator. which essentially means that an operator who is dealing with an e-com operator like a Red Bus or a Make My Trip, right, will have to necessarily now pay 5% GST, right? No matter there is a huge amount of input tax credit which is pending. So these abnormalities adversely impact the returns and impact the overall returns which are going to come to the investors. But still, I think we are in a very comfortable 15 to 18% zone where a lot of transactions can be done.
Thanks for that. Dr. Grossel, if I can come to you now. There's a question in the Q&A chat box, which is about, what do you see as the scope for battery as a service in the EV bus segment? We've seen some instance of that actually, playing out in the Indian market as well, but not much of commercial, success. So in your experience, have you seen any markets where swapping batteries, especially for electric buses, commercially has been working out well?
Frankly speaking, there were some trials, I would say it in that way, especially we have seen it in China. So when China started electromobility, they were trying out the swapping of batteries. But I would say there was not a really breakthrough. And if I look on Europe and North America, we didn't see nearly no battery swapping solutions. So currently we see really the charging solutions. So that means battery stays in the vehicle and we try to charge it. And regarding the charges, I think the game is still very open. So there are different ways of charging. One is the overnight charging. So do the complete day with one battery charge, have bigger batteries in the vehicle and charge it overnight. The other second is the opportunity charging, where we have smaller vehicles and smaller batteries in the vehicle, and then try to charge it on an end station, for example, for 10 minutes, and then do a second loop. So for these two charging opportunities, I think the game still is very, very open, and we see it, I would say, equally in the market. So battery swapping, we don't see it very often, frankly speaking.
Okay, but just a curious question here is that while many countries have been able to, or not many, but few of them have been able to implement battery swapping in smaller vehicles, especially I think two-wheeler segment, and even in cars also, I think it seems to be happening. But why for buses it seems to be a challenge? Is it something to do with the technology or the weight of the overall batteries which are placed in buses?
I would say from my point of view, yes, because the batteries are quite big for the buses. They are quite heavy. Sometimes you have the batteries even on the roof of a bus. So it's not very easy just to move it out and put in a new battery. So I think this could be a blocking point or a hurdle for swapping battery solutions.
Sure. Mr. Ramanathan, if I can come to you now, sir. As Dr. Grossel mentioned, I think the most pragmatic solution is having charging infrastructure. And as Sumit also mentioned that, post or rather after, the SRTU segment, the other segment which is likely to see penetration is the intercity segment. And where because of decent mileage, that segment becomes viable on its own. But at the same time, that's a segment which requires charging infrastructure, a widespread charging infrastructure, especially on the highways. So what kind of role that, the auto component manufacturers can play as part of the overall vendor ecosystem to be able to participate in that opportunity?
There are quite a lot of auto component companies are joining hands with different players in developing the charging infrastructure. Basically, the charging station requires the similar kind of technologies as a electric bus requires. There is a charging station requires typically the converters and the storage system and the kind of connectors and the other thing. But other than that, this charging station also requires a free flow of power, like which could be like combining intelligently with a source of solar power or something that may be very important to provide uninterrupted supply of power for the charging stations. So, as such, many companies are joining hands with different like oil companies or different players to create the charging infrastructure. In ZF also, we are evaluating the opportunity along with our aftermarket team.
Sure. In the interest of time, maybe what I'll do now is we'll come to each one of you and ask you what are your expectations in terms of the growth of electric buses in India over a certain period. And at the same time, Rohit, if we can also take up as a poll with our audience at the same time. So do you think that we are well on our way to achieve 8 to 10% EV penetration in buses by the year 2025? Now, while we await the views of the participants here, I would like to ask you, Mr. Ramanathan, your views. Do you think that's a fairly achievable number, or something that can be achieved? We can outperform that very easily, looking at the way things have panned out in E3 wheelers and two wheelers now.
I'm quite optimistic. I find I think we can overachieve that. I am putting the figure as somewhere around 20%, 20 to 30%.
Okay.
By 2026.
By 2026. So roughly, let's say if we sell close to about 90,000 to 1 lakh buses, you're saying that about 30,000 electric buses per annum we'll be able to sell by 2026. I think that will be a great ramp up for the industry.
Yeah.
That's great. Sumit, would you like to share your views on where do you see industry?
No, so from a demand side, I don't think so there is any challenge. I think absorbing more than 30,000 or 40,000 buses should not be a challenge, right? The moment we are hitting a parity, right, in terms of total cost of ownership, I think, this market is going to explore in a different manner, right? 1 million to 2 million buses in the country. For example, a lot of the STUs, including Delhi, the buses are having an age of approximately 8 to 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So clearly there is a need, and if it is kind of facilitated by low capex upfront, which is a constraint for most of the STUs, I think the STU demand can really go exponential. And in the B2C segment also, I think once the proof of concept is established, I think there are a lot of people who are waiting on the sidelines to kind of jump in and kind of really explore. So I am very confident that this will be there. But I think the constraint is on the supply side, where the supply of the buses, the supply of the batteries are the ones which are holding us back. Clearly today, there is a clear opportunity of another 2,000-3,000 buses that we want to deploy. But really the supply is a big challenge that we face on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Dr. Grossel, would you also like to share your views? While you've been looking at the global markets, but I'm sure you'll have some views on how penetration can actually pan out over a period of medium term.
I think from a percentage point of view, it should be manageable, and the colleagues in the line are here quite closer to the market. So 8 to 10% in 5 years, I think this is achievable. What we saw from a global point of view is the vehicles are not the problem. So vehicle technology is available, subsidies are also available. The issue is we need the infrastructure, charging infrastructure has to be available. Also, the electricity has to be available because you need the electricity to charge the vehicles. And as a third issue, standardization. It was also mentioned today, standardization was also a driver. Just to give you a small example, if you have different vehicles in your fleet, and every vehicle have a different plug for the charging, it's a nightmare for the fleet. And then they are not really wanting to transfer. So this would be the issues: infrastructure, electrification, or electricity availability, but also standardization, not just focusing on the vehicle itself.
Sure. No, I think all of our panel members are optimistic from a demand side perspective. And I think Mr. Arya also mentioned some very optimistic numbers on how the EV penetration in buses will pan out. I clearly understand, I think, the points raised by Sumit and you, that the challenges are more on the supply side and creating the right kind of an infrastructure, which is not just cost efficient, but standardized as well, to be able to see a very smooth ramp up. So let's get the votes as well, Rohit, and see how our participants actually look at this. Okay, so clearly, I think everyone seems to be in sync. 52% of our participants also believe that we are well on our way to achieve 8 to 10% share of electric buses as percentage of total bus sales by 2025. 31% believe that they may have some challenges, but clearly I think we see majority of people believing that we are well on our way. So with this, I would like to hand over the discussion back to Rohit for the closing remarks.
Thanks, Shamsher. Just give me a second. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it is right there.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Shamsher, for moderating this session. Thank you, the speaker group, for your enthusiastic participation. And I want to thank you all, the attendees, for joining us for today's live session. I hope you enjoyed the session and found it useful. I want to thank you all for your all the questions you asked. You raised 15-20 odd questions, and the panel members have addressed a majority of them. And a few of those which we couldn't attend in the time that was available, I'll definitely touch base with the panelists and share their thoughts with you. And I would request you to finally take out some time whenever you're exiting the session to share your feedback in the feedback form that opens when you exit the session. And again, the speaker group, thank you so much for taking out the time. Thanks to our session partners ZF for supporting the session. And thank you all for joining us once again. And as I mentioned at the start of the session, I am really pleased to inform that after a 2-year hiatus, the Commercial Vehicle Forum is back to its pre-pandemic glory. The event takes place on 9th June 2022 at JW Marriott Pune. There'll be many such discussions that will be taking place. So head on over to cvforum.in to know more and block your spots. I look forward to welcoming you all at the, and meeting you physically in June in person and shake your hands. In the meantime, here is a goodbye from all of us.
Thank you, Rohit.
Thank you, Shamsher. Thank you, Rohit.
Thanks so much.
Thank